Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today I'm going to be taking a look at a game that I did show off once over a year ago, I think it is now, but never really played on the channel regularly, and I'd like to build a series out of this, although I'm not entirely sure how yet. That game is Gary Grigsby's Eagle Day to Bombing the Reich. This is actually a sort of combination of two games. So Gary Grigsby is the developer behind War in the Pacific, War in the East, War in the West, all of those sort of gigantic World War II games that look at World War II either on the Eastern Front, the Western Front, or the Pacific Theater at sort of a granular level and a turn-based strategy slash war game. Now, Bombing the Reich and Eagle Day were two different games that were developed. Again, with Grigsby as the developer, I believe they were both Talonsoft games back in the 1990s. And the catalog was, or the IP was purchased by Matrix Games many years ago, and they re-released both of those games as sort of a combination. So Eagle Day was this grand strategy World War II strategic air campaign game that looked at the Battle of Britain. And Bombing the Reich was the same game engine, except it looked at the air war in Western Europe from 1943 until 1945. So the Allied combined bomber offensive and the tactical campaigns as well during that period. So again, you kind of have the German offensive against the British in Eagle Day, and then you have the Allied offensive against Germany in Bombing the Reich. And there were two separate games, but essentially Matrix sort of repackaged them, remastered them, and over 5 years ago, I believe it was, re-released the game to consumers. Now, I think actually, by the way, my name is in one of the squadrons. I think I'm like a B-25 pilot or something like that. It was kind of cool when Matrix was doing this. I think it was actually kind of similar to Admiral Edition. It was years ago, so I may be a little bit off base here, but I think it was similar to Admiral's Edition, where it was somewhat a community project that was put together by Matrix. But I may be wrong there. But they did when they were developing this ask for all sorts of fans, people who are following, people who are just sort of in the forums. If they wanted their names in the game, they could get their names in the game, and I am in there. I'm just trying to remember if I'm I remember I was hoping I would be a B-17 crew member or a B-17 pilot, because I sort of have this soft spot for the B-17, as many people do, but I wasn't. So I was some other pilot. I don't think I was British. I think it was an American Tactical Air Force pilot. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So what I'm going to be doing here and what I'm showing you is the first turn of the game of Bombing the Reich. So the game was re-released, and it kind of sat there. And unfortunately, it was a bit buggy. There were some issues with the game. I'm assuming it wasn't a huge financial success because the game never really got patched. And it went years and years and years. And I owned the game. I bought it when it came out. But there's just sort of this general sense of like, all right, it's out there, but it's kind of a faulty game. There's a lot of bugs. There's a lot of issues. It's not really playable, or it is, but there's a lot of issues to it. But this February, actually, Matrix and Slytherin did release a patch, an update. Again, I believe it was sort of fan-driven. But that's pretty exciting for a game that had been out for over 4 years to get a patch out of the blue to fix some of those issues. And I decided, why don't we go back and take a look at the game? I did sort of a first impressions video of this pre-patch, and now that the patch is out, I figured it would make sense to revisit. And I will say that from a aesthetic perspective, the game is pretty good looking, if you will. The art has been updated as part of, I believe, as part of the patch, if not just since the last time I played it. But it looks nice here. You can see currently on the map I am operating in Italy. This is actually a max effort turn. So this is turn number 1 of the game for Bombing the Reich, which is, again, the Western Allies' offensive against Germany. Starts in August of 1943, so it's not really day 1 of the strategic bomber offensive, but August of 1943, or at least August 17th, when the game starts, when the campaign starts, is significant because it's the day that the Allies, or the Americans, launched the first raid on Schweinfurt, the German ball bearings factory in Schweinfurt, Germany, the Schweinfurt Regensburg mission, which was the first really big effort to try and crush German industry with a deep penetration strike deep into Germany during daylight operating hours for U.S. bombers in a substantial scale. The combined bomber offensive between the U.S. and the British, which is what this game really looks at, actually started, I believe it was in June of 1943, with a directive that was known as Point and Blank. But the first serious deep penetration raids was this Schweinfurt Regensburg mission. Interestingly enough, it was supposed to happen in early August, and it was really supposed to be focused in and around German aircraft production facilities in and around Schweinfurt and Regensburg, which produced more than half of all of Germany's fighter aircraft at the time. But due to bad weather, it got postponed. In the end, there were sort of two main targets: Regensburg, which was a large Messerschmitt plant, which produced a large number of the German Bf-109s, and then the Schweinfurt ball bearings plants. This was, as Bomber Harris, the commander of the British Bomber Command, would refer to it, this was a bit of a panacea target. This idea was this raid would go in, it would smash this target, and the entire German economy would collapse because of a single target being attacked and destroyed. Essentially, this vital jugular of the German industry. Ball bearings plants create these, essentially these little tiny metal balls, these ball bearings that are critical in so many industries, so many moving parts, so many sort of finished products. The idea was if you wipe this out, you will completely cripple the German air industry as well as the rest of the German war economy. So the thought was, you send in these 380 or so bombers, they hit the target, and then eventually the German economy will collapse shortly thereafter. The problem is, as anyone who knows anything about the combined bomber offensive in the early days of the daylight raids for the U.S., is that they didn't have sufficient fighter escort. First off, you probably also have an invalid assumption that the German economy would collapse, but it certainly was more vulnerable in 1943 when the ball bearing industry wasn't yet dispersed. Again, it was very centrally located in and around Schweinfurt. Almost all of their ball bearings were produced there. But this idea was you send this raid in, and they go in and they're self-defending bombers. So the Flying Fortress was nicknamed the Flying Fortress for a reason. It had, like 10 50 caliber machine guns mounted on it, and it would be able to beat off the German fighters. Well, the raid occurred on August 17th. It was a disaster. Some 60 U.S. bombers were shot down. Almost another 100 were damaged. That's almost 50% of the force suffering some kind of damage. More than 600 members of these bombers were either killed, wounded, or missing. The actual number shot down was nearly 1 in 6 of every bomber that took off was shot down. And it was just sort of this epic disaster of a military offensive. The raids did some substantial damage and did give Speer a little bit of unease because he knew how concentrated the industry was. Albert Speer, the sort of the head of the German war economy, but it didn't obviously accomplish the end goals that it had set out. So this game starts on August 17th, which was the date of that raid. I think it's an interesting start date. I think I would have started in June of 1943 with the point-blank directive. You couldn't go much earlier than that, though, because the Allied bombers, or the American bomber force in Europe, was very small in 1942 and early 1943 due to diversions to support the campaigns in North Africa. But in any event, the fact that we're basing the start date of the campaign around the anniversary of the Schweinfurt raids is a thing, I guess. In this particular turn, I mentioned this is a max effort turn. What I mean by that is I have every single recon plane at my disposal in Northern Europe, and almost all of the recon planes in the Mediterranean have missions to get recon on various targets. I also have a 112 bomber raid that's going to occur in Italy with B-17s. About 500, or maybe it was about 400 B-17s in Europe are launching missions. Over 900 bombers from the British Bomber Command are launching missions against Emden to try and flatten Emden. My overall strategy in this game is going to be to first target the German fuel dumps, which provide the needed aviation gas for the German fighters. Then I will target the oil industries that produce that fuel. Hopefully I will cripple the German Air Force substantially enough that then I can just start targeting other critical industries in Germany at relative ease. So in Northern Europe, I have various targets hitting fuel dumps in and around Amsterdam, in and around, what is this, Flushing on the map there. There's an oil target. And then I also have a number of fighter sweeps that are occurring at air bases which are either conveniently located or where I believe the Germans may have fighter aircraft stations. So in addition to trying to wipe out the fuel supply for the fighters, my other objective is going to be to destroy as many of the German fighters on the ground as possible, because as the Schweinfurt raid proves, deep penetration strikes for my forces at this stage in the game are going to be incredibly difficult. I have no desire to fly my bombers deep into Germany and lose 60 plus. What I will do is kind of fly at the periphery and use my fighters to strike at German airfields where the fighters might be on the ground to try and destroy as many of their airframes as possible. If we can kind of hit them really quick and knock them on their heels a little bit, then maybe we can launch a little bit deeper strikes with sort of the periphery of their defenses maybe weakened somewhat. What you're seeing here in front of you is the sort of playback footage from the first turn on August 17th of 1943. So this game sort of goes in phases where, as the Allies, you have to sort of plan your missions. So you would say, all right, I want to bomb this target. Then you'd pick what air unit you want to be the lead unit that's going to sort of be influencing how accurate the bombs are going to be dropped. Then you would pick any additional bombing units that you want, and then you'd assign fighter escorts. It also has the ability to launch fighter sweeps, which are where your aircraft fly to a particular location. If it's an airfield and they don't encounter an enemy aircraft, then they'll dive down and try and strafe the airfield and destroy aircraft on the ground if there are aircraft on the ground. And then often they'll loiter in that area for a little while and sometimes shoot down enemy aircraft taking off or landing. In addition to fighter sweeps, there's recon missions, which are important to sort of assess damage and also get information on future targets. There are night bombing missions, which are the British Royal Air Force's principal bomber force are night bombers. So the Americans bombed during the day during World War II in Europe. By 1943, the British were mostly, although not exclusively, but they were mostly bombing at night under the cover of darkness. And sort of the Allies sort of had this fundamental difference of view of how to wage a bombing campaign. The Americans, as you could sort of tell by my discussion about Schweinfurt, would often look at things and say, all right, we want to destroy precise industrial targets. Our goal is not to wipe out civilian populations. Our goal is to destroy German war production, which will then lead to victory on the battlefield. And or the Germans coming to the peace table without even necessarily needing to go to the battlefield, because they'll recognize their inability to continue to wage a conflict. Now, this was sort of the fundamental principle of the American bomber campaign, as many books and whatnot will look at. You'll find out that as the American technology starts to advance, as the ineffectiveness of precision bombing sort of becomes apparent, and as the reality of the weather in Europe becomes apparent, that it's overcast a lot, what you will see is you'll see Americans sort of continue this premise of precision bombing, but essentially, hey, if you can't find the target, just drop the bombs through overcast on the general vicinity of where the target should be on your maps, or where your sort of navigation tells you it should be. And if they just happen to level a city while they do it, well, you know, that's all we could do, right? The British were a little bit more less. The British viewpoint was described as a dehousing effort, which essentially the idea was wipe out all the German homes that Germans live in, and you'll cause society to break down. If everybody loses their homes, or if you get a critical mass of Germans who lose their homes, who lose their dwellings, who become refugees, then you will spark a revolution in Germany. And the game reflects these two different varying strategies, with the American Bomber Command, the Strategic Bomber Command, attacking industrial targets during the day, which is what you're looking at in front of you, or the British Bomber Command bombing at night, and you get points for terror bombing. So, you know, you have these large bomber streams that operate at night, you pick area targets, and then you try and wipe out cities, which will then give you points, which is a little bit a little bit discomforting, points for creating terror in these German cities, which can lead you to your victory point. So the Americans get points for destroying, in this game, industry. They get industrial destruction points. The British get points for destroying cities themselves and getting terror points. And the game does also reflect sort of that inaccuracy of precision bombing. So if you bomb a city as an American during the day, what you'll target is the marshalling yards, so the railways, which has a substantial impact on the efficiency of nearby industry or nearby troops to be able to get reinforcements or things like that. But there is a chance that your bombs that are targeted for the railroads may miss the railroads and may hit the city, and they'll cause area damage, which is sort of that terror bombing factor. In addition to that, the British, when they're bombing area targets, often they will influence damage on the rail yards as well in the same cities. So you sort of have a little bit of crossover there back and forth between the two objectives, and you get rewarded points accordingly. So right now, and in addition to that, the game also represents tactical air forces, which are invariably all operating during the day. So the British have Boston bombers, I think they have some B-25 Mitchells. They have some tactical bombers, Typhoons, which are these fighter bombers that are operating during the day, and the American Tactical Air Force with their B-25s, B-26s are also operating during the day. And you can target industrial targets with those as well. Those things are incredibly fragile and die in droves. But they do provide value. And in this particular campaign, I'm bombing 2 oil targets in and around Amsterdam with B-17s, and I'm bombing a 3rd oil target, which has a smaller capacity, so I feel like I need less damage, with some British tactical bombers. In addition to that, down by Flushing, I'm bombing a oil facility there, again with tactical bombers, I believe of the U.S. Tactical Force, the 9th Air Force, I think it is, bombing with some B-25, or the B-26s, there might be B-26 Marauders down there. I have over 4,500 sorties of aircraft, which are going to be participating in this first turn of this game. So again, I'm pretty much trying to just hit the Germans as hard as I can initially and kind of get them on their heels, and then we'll respond from there. So I'm initially hitting the oil targets that are easily within my reach without too many casualties, hopefully, in and around Amsterdam, Flushing, and whatnot. I think I will follow that up on future turns with hitting the oil targets in and around Paris, and then I will also hit the oil targets in and around Emden. So I'm launching my British night bombers against Emden tonight to try and flatten that city, influence that rail facility, if we can wipe out the rail production, and then we'll go ahead after the oil tanks in and around Emden. From there, I will start targeting the actual oil industry and go from there. Now, the game has things that are called critical industries, which is where you get really the bulk of your industrial points for killing those targets, and those tend to be things like ball bearing plants or armament factories or steel works, sort of fundamental pieces to a war economy. Interestingly enough, oil is not classified as that, which you would think like you need oil to operate your economy, and sort of the way the Allies finally ended up seeing substantial success by the end of the war was crippling the German oil industry. In this game, it seems like oil is principally used to determine a German economy's ability to have aircraft operate. So destroying oil directly reduces the ability of Germans, if you destroy enough of it, to launch sorties against your bombers, which therefore makes attacking other targets easier. But it's not classified as a critical industry, which means I don't think I really get a ton of points for this. But in any event, I'm trying to ease the pain. I'm trying to destroy these targets that are important, so that I can destroy the other targets that allow me to win the game with greater ease. So we'll see how that all works out. You can see here, this is a very slow-moving turn right now. I have the when you issue your orders, essentially it's turn-based, but it's turn-based in phases. So the first thing you do as the Allies is you issue the orders of everything you want to do. Where do I want to recon? Where do I want to bomb? Where do I want to night bomb? Where do I want to send in night fighters? Those kind of things. Then what you do is you submit and you watch the turn play out, which is what we're seeing here. And you can change the speed that the game plays out as well as the message level. So right now I'm on message level 2, which means if aircraft are destroyed, I will be notified. If aircraft crash, I will be notified. And it's on an individual basis here. So I've got multiple squadrons attacking this Italian airfield here that has a substantial number of aircraft on the ground. they're strafing these aircraft on the ground, they're destroying them, they're damaging them, and we're getting pop-ups that notify us of this. This may seem a little bit boring, and frankly, the turn took over an hour to play out, but you don't have to play on this level of detail. You can turn messages to level 3, which gives you more detail, level 1, which gives you less, or level 0, which gives you no notifications. And if you do that, then you can progress through this turn pretty quickly, maybe 5-10 minutes, maybe a little bit more for a battle where you've got over 4,000 aircraft taking off. But in any event, it's a much quicker turnaround. I just figured I'd leave that on for sort of my initial discussion and sort of intro of this game. I decided to come back to this game for a few reasons. One, the patch in February made me think, oh, it's probably worth taking a look at. And I do apologize for the resolution. This game, I don't have it able to display in 1080p or in 16 by 900. So this is this old sort of weird framework, if you will. I'll try and up-render it to 1080p and see if it stretches, see how it looks. But the game doesn't play in sort of native 1080p because, again, it's based off a 1990s game. But it is a really interesting game and a really detailed game, and it fits sort of the Gary Grigsby model. So when you complete your turn and everything's done, then you go in and you see a summary of the results. You can dive into each raid, see how many planes were shot down, see how many interceptors were shot down, see what you destroyed on the ground, what was the damage to the facilities. Fog of War, I believe, is sort of modeled in where, like, you might say, oh, we did 99% damage, but then you do a recon mission for that target that you hit the next day and you find out, actually, we didn't do any damage. So it's a very detailed and deep game. Each turn represents one day. This is the grand campaign. You can start in multiple different increments. There's campaigns that allow you to look at just individual operations, like the Big Week against the German Air Forces in 1944, or the Schweinfurt raids, or the oil campaigns, and they're much smaller campaigns. You can do a 1944 campaign. The 1943 campaign takes you through the whole war. They've got one that's devoted to what if the Germans developed jet fighters early, and you can look at that as well. So there's a lot of different options to play, but this is sort of the granddaddy of them all, the main campaign that you're witnessing in front of you. The other piece to this is that this is all being played from the Allied perspective, which really gives you limited control over your air forces. You get a set number of planes that are going to come in and to reinforce your units. So, you know, I've got 12 or whatever bomber groups in Europe, and they all have B-17s right now. I could assign B-24s as they come into my stockpile to some of those units, and I probably will. But I don't actually control the production. I don't get to say, hey, USA, produce more B-17Gs, produce more B-24s. I want to use some B-29s. I don't have that as an option. If you play from the German point of view, you get all of this that you're seeing in front of you, but the game is much deeper because there you actually have to control your entire industrial output. So you're defending your industry from Allied bombing raids, but then you also have to plan out what fighters are you making, how many engines are you making, what are your fuel supplies, and things like that. So it's a much deeper game, kind of like in War in the Pacific, whereas the Allies, you have very limited production capabilities. Another Grigsby game is the Japanese, you have total control over the Japanese industry. So it's a similar concept there. But for my own sake, and given the fact that I don't have any idea what I'm doing, I'm really going to be focusing on playing as the Allies, and I will leave a more experienced player, perhaps someone like STRG, will take a look at the German campaign, or maybe, you know, if I ever complete this campaign, we may look at it from the German point of view. Now, I do want to hear from all of you to see if this is something that you're interested in, or if this is a game that you'd like to see me play more. I will say I don't think I'm going to play it in quite this way, where I just show you everything that's happening, you know, as it happens. I've kind of toyed around with creating almost like cable news graphics, where it's like, here are the number of bombers dispatched, here were the numbers that were lost, here was the target that was attacked, and the damage that was inflicted. Almost like a really quick snippet of like a PowerPoint presentation almost to summarize things, and then sort of an occasional maybe like 5-10 minutes of clicking around, showing you the units, showing you the targets, but really sort of pulling you away from the results. I didn't want to do that for this sort of first intro video because I do, you know, I don't want to mislead of what the game looks like, how it plays, anything like that. This is how the game plays when you're doing a turn result. Again, you can speed things up or whatnot. But I do just I want to kind of balance transparency with easily digestible information. In addition to that, I will probably also do some discussions about the Bomber campaign. I just finished reading Bomber Command by Max Hastings, which, as a historian, I think he tends to give the Germans a little bit more credit for being a highly organized and efficient military economy when there's a lot of myths around the German military economy, German efficiency, and whatnot during World War II, and I think he kind of buys into that a little bit too much. But overall, it's a really interesting look at the British Bomber Command and the operations at night, led by Bomber Harrison and those before him against the German cities. And then last summer, I read a book called Masters of the Air, which I think I might have actually done a book review, I'm not sure, which was a look at the American bomber campaign during World War II as well. An excellent book, which I believe is also being used as sort of the inspiration for a Band of Brothers-like series that Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg are working on for the bombing campaign against Germany. I think they've got like a $250 million budget to put the whole thing together, and it's going to be like, you know, they did Band of Brothers, they did the Pacific. I think the next one they're looking at is going to be this bombing command one, and then I think there's like a destroyer one as well that they're working on, like in the Pacific. But it was largely based off Masters of the Air, which was this history book that came out a couple of years ago, and which I read a year or so ago. So I've kind of been reading a little bit about the bombing campaigns, and I think it's an interesting idea. I think it could be a good topic for some historical discussions to kind of trace the major campaigns, the major milestones, the operations, the objectives, the results, and talk a little bit about that, as well as some of the literature that's out there. Because again, I've read Masters of the Air. There's another book out there that I read maybe like 6 months ago called, I think, To Command the Skies, which also looked at the American bomber campaign against Germany, specifically sort of the effort to gain air superiority against the German air forces in preparation for the invasion of Europe. So overall, it's just, you know, it's one of those historical topics that I know a reasonable amount of, much more on the American side than the British, but I know a reasonable amount and is interesting. And I sort of have a soft spot. When I was younger, I used to play Chuck Yeager's Air Combat all the time, and I always wanted to play with as many B-17s as I could get on the screen. I think Battle of Britain 2, which kind of has a Falcon 4.0 like dynamic campaign, is one of the best air combat games ever. I'm trying to get a little bit more into Isle 2 and sort of get a little bit more into flight sims, but sort of the strategic element of air combat is what really interests me, frankly, and how it fits into the bigger picture. I know I used to play B-17 The Mighty Eighth by Microprose, which is a B-17 simulation that I would just beg that someone would remake with with modern computers and processors, the ability to up the graphic fidelity, but then also up the number of aircraft that are sort of operating. The idea of seeing hundreds, if not thousands, of aircraft in the skies is something that makes my mouth water and that I want to see. So, you know, this is an area that I have a fair bit of passion about and interest in, and I'd like to do some series around. And I think this is a useful game for some of those discussions that could be had. But let me know what you guys think, because this is an area that I think what I think I have the most enjoyment in doing, and frankly, my YouTube videos have always been about, like, what do I enjoy doing, what do I want to play, and what do I think works well, like what you guys enjoy. But I always try and do things that I enjoy, is sort of playing a game, but really not talking too much about the game. Like, this is an interesting type of game where I could definitely go in depth about some of the mechanics, how the game works, sort of the rationale for why I'm doing things and why I'm making some of the decisions that I'm making, but it plays out at a pace that I can also have a fair amount to just talk about history. And I think, you know, I did the recent Ultimate General video about General Meade and sort of talking about his historical legacy and sort of why we think of Meade or don't think of Meade in certain ways. And when I recorded that video, frankly, I've been a little bit absent lately. I took a short vacation, but I've also just kind of been trying to figure out, like, what do I want to do next? I've got sort of this Civil War series that I've been trying to get going, but frankly is a lot of work, and I just haven't had the time or the energy to get it to where it needs to be. It's still intending for it to come this summer, but I just haven't gotten it out yet. But I've been trying to figure out, like, outside of that, which is going to be a more highly polished type of a thing, what do I want to do? Like, what do I want to be talking about? What do I want to be playing? And I think this is an interesting game that sort of allows to talk about the gameplay, which I know a lot of you prefer, but also gives a lot of opportunity to talk about the history. And it is an interesting topic. It's a controversial topic too. Strategic bombing is not something that, I'm a little bit. It's a little bit interesting because, like, you're playing a game where you're trying to create firestorms that kill tens of thousands of people. It's a little bit morally dubious, frankly, to try and portray that in a video game. But I think this game does a fair job of certainly not glorifying it, and trying to paint it in a larger strategic picture. And frankly, our opinions of strategic bombing have changed immeasurably between World War II and today. And frankly, even probably from when this game was first conceived in the 1990s to today. But I digress. I think this is a good game to talk about the gameplay, talk about the history, but I'm also interested to hear what all of you have to say. So I'm actually not going to finish the turn. Again, I just wanted to show you guys this is kind of the level of results you can get. You can go deeper, you can go less deep. You could finish this turn well in advance of now. You can see so far we've destroyed over 100 German aircraft. We've lost about 47. It's going to be a bloody day over Europe. It's only 6:46. The day is still young, and we have bombers in Italy that are bombing German infantry targets. I'm doing that primarily because German military units are also on the map. So you've got sort of the strategic elements of bombing factories and things like that, but there's also military units that are on the map. If you destroy German ground units, then you can speed up the breakouts that occur in Italy and Europe and whatnot when landings occur. And we're only, like a month in advance of Operation, what was that called again? It wasn't Husky. Husky was Sicily. Was it Avalanche? Yeah, Operation Avalanche, which occurred in September of 1943. So we're only about a month in advance, actually less than a month, ahead of the landings in Italy. So while my focus in Northern Europe is going to be to wipe out the German Air Force and gain air superiority so we can have Operation Overlord occur, my focus in Italy is going to be a mixture of destroying German aircraft so that it contributes toward overstraining Germany's ability to replace their air losses and balancing that against targets that I think will help the invasion when it does occur in Italy in a couple of weeks. With that being said, guys, this turn isn't yet over. We will pick it up and talk a little bit more about the gameplay and maybe a historical discussion topic in our next video. And I'll see about maybe shrinking things down and kind of consolidating things and making things perhaps a little bit more YouTube friendly. But again, I did want to show you, hey, this is what it can be, and this is just a piece of it, before I start doing that and painting some sort of perhaps different view of what the game really is. I don't know. Maybe we'll play some. We'll probably tinker with both. We'll play some turns out fully the way they are, and we'll play some turns out with just some summary results of saying, here's what I'm trying to do, here's what happened, and that's that. Anyway, I have been rambling enough by now, so I think what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and end it here. I want to thank everybody for tuning in once again. I definitely want to hear what your thoughts are in the description below, so please don't forget to do that. And yeah, so that's that. And until next time, guys, this is the Historical Gamer, as always, saying thank you for watching. And until next time, I'm out. Bye-bye!